You know, um, there's a lot of haters out there I don't know if you've heard, but on the internet, people can kind of say whatever they want, and sometimes they're wrong.
What?
Um, and yeah, it's shocking to me as well.
Damn.
But every once in a while, you'll see somebody who has a critique of our hard work that we put our blood, sweat, and tears into as scientists.
Emphasis on the
And
tears.
they say something that makes us cry
Yeah.
because they don't get it.
Yeah.
It's
They don't.
it's heartbreaking. They don't understand.
They don't get us.
They just don't. We're so misunderstood, and I don't know if I can do it anymore.
Is this the retirement
It
episode
might be
from Just Science, and we're going full into Magic the Gathering podcast?
Oh, I'm here for this though.
Yeah,
I would love to play some more Magic.
Dude, the switch on that was insane. Oh, instant hype. It's kind of scary, but also very exciting.
That's how you know you failed, when you drop out of PhD school and start playing Magic.
Yeah. Fail in quotations. Success in the eyes of many, including
Failing
me.
upwards.
Yeah,
Failing upwards.
that's how we do. But
Yeah.
no, I agree. It's man, research is hard, and I think we're joking slightly in the tone that we're saying. But I think this is where we're coming from in this episode. We're going to talk about a lot of the stuff that people just don't really know about research until you actually do it. Kind of the behind the scenes stuff, right? Where it again, with social media especially, it's easy to make assumptions. It's easy to say, why didn't they do this? If they should have done, this 1 year study instead, that way we have more data. All this stuff we'll kind of dive into. But I think it's just important to acknowledge maybe some own limitations of yourself. If you are going to speak about it, that, if you haven't done research, it's just know that and be kind to yourself as you're discussing it. Be kind to others that may not know how research is conducted. And then I think that's the biggest thing. Again, not saying you need to have done research or currently doing research to talk about this stuff. Not at all. We want more people talking about it because it helps everyone. It helps learning. But the way you talk about it, the magnitude of strength you give it, and then the hype, all this stuff that social media comes with, right? I think it can come to a point, we've briefly talked about this before, where it becomes just aggressive. It's just the nature of it is not conducive to anything. And that's not what we want science to be. That's not what we want the community of science-based or just lifting in general to be, right? I think it should be a welcoming thing. People of all levels of knowledge, of experience, all that. We're just lifting some iron at the end of the day, right? So we do just also like to do science on top of that. So yeah, I think that's where we're coming from this episode.
Yeah, well said. To be very clear, I was joking at the beginning, if you couldn't tell.
So it's not Magic the Gathering podcast.
It's not, unfortunately. But yeah, just to be super duper clear, so no one takes this the wrong way. Like, there's nothing wrong with not knowing all the stuff that goes. Of course, people don't know all the stuff that happens, because like, if you haven't done it, how are you supposed to know, right? Like, that's part of why some of us go to grad school, so that we can learn those things and have more context around. Like, we want to be able to be like a science communicator or whatever, right? And so, like, that was, at least me personally, that was one of my motivations of doing the grad school thing, is I wanted more context to be able to do that, to at least what I perceive at a higher, deeper level, So I think that there's nothing wrong with not knowing those things. Like, we're not talking down to anybody. We're not, there's nothing. It's all good vibes here at the Training Arc, as always. But what our goal with this, I think, is just to shed some light on these things, to just help people understand more of the stuff, right? And like, this isn't a like, hey, you're wrong, shut up and let us do our thing. Like, it's not that at all. It's just like, hey, you haven't been in the lab, so you might not know. Here's kind of some of the other stuff to think about, right? That's as we talked about before, kind of reaching that hand out and helping each other collectively improve our understanding and nuance, the most difficult word in all of fitness. So why don't we start? I think you had a really good idea of kind of starting with, like, what is the goal of research? And I think that's a good way to kind of lay the foundation of where we can go with a lot of this stuff. So how would you describe that?
Yeah, it's both difficult and simple to even describe that. But I think when it comes down to it, when you conduct research, you're trying to answer a question, right? You come up with this question. however you come up with it. But that itself can be tough, right? In figuring it out. But I think a lot of times it's sparked just through our experience in the gym. Like we said, we're just dudes in the training all the time and just invested in the stuff. We see other people train, we train other people. Sometimes we just get curious, right? We want to, explore things further. And that's how we sometimes come up with questions. Like I have on my notepad and my phone, I just have a bunch of questions about, oh, this would be cool to experiment either with myself, maybe in the future of an actual study, just, questioning things and seeking for a better understanding, which essentially is science at the end of the day, right? So I think, trying to answer a specific question is where we're coming from. And a lot of the times that relates or translates to doing things a specific way to help answer that question. And that is where we get a little bit muddy, right? That's where it can be tough to figure out, how you're going to conduct the study, trying to balance practicality versus feasibility. There's so much to talk about, so we can kind of dive into that, I think, and just kind of figure out, like, okay, yes, we're trying to answer this question. A lot of the times that question might not be, an optimal way to train, but that's not what we're after. A lot of times we're not always looking for how does this translate exactly into the gym, right? The ecological validity of things. Like, we're not trying to take people and do their exact training program in the lab all the time. Sometimes yes, but sometimes no, and that's okay too. It just depends. How are we going to best answer this question that we have in front of us, right? And I think when you really have a clear understanding of what that question is, you have a place to start. But again, it takes time to get to that question, because with that comes so many things, right? Because again, you have this question generally, and now whole different ball game. We're trying to figure out how do we navigate this. A lot of times we start with looking at where the literature is, and I think that's a place we can dive into a little bit more. Like,
Yeah. I think that's to know what to do. You got to know what's been done, right? Like this is another thing that I certainly didn't know when I was coming in, and probably a lot of people don't think about it either. Is like research all builds on itself, right? Like you can't have a hypothesis really without anything to base it on. Which sometimes is fine. Sometimes you're going in and you're just like, hey, we're just going to do this and explore what happens. And, I don't really have a hypothesis. That's also okay. But a lot of the time we're building upon previous work. Just like everyone, we do this in practice too, right? We see what other coaches have done, blah, blah, blah. Okay, this seems to work. In my experience, though, I've noticed this little thing. When we build on that, it all kind of works the same way. So that's usually where we're starting, is like we start to kind of look through. You get on, PubMed, Google Scholar, etc. There's a bunch of places to look, and you can start to see on this topic. Maybe you find a recent, usually, well, here, maybe this is helpful for anyone who wants to do this. Where I usually start is like if you search certain keywords and then you try to filter it by like reviews and meta-analyses, and you find just the most recent one. Cool. Maybe it was a couple years ago or whatever. And you can click on that. You can go read that. You can go through all the references. It's going to reference, if it's a systematic review or a meta-analysis, it's usually going to reference most, if not all, of the stuff on that topic that was done previously. So that can get you up to speed pretty, not quickly, because it might be a lot of papers, but like as efficiently as it can, rather than just sifting through random search terms and stuff. And then you look through some of the references in that review paper, and then you might look through the references in that one. You're going to start to notice that there's a lot of crossover, and you're like, okay, this is a good collection of what's been done before. Some sites will have links to like more recent articles that have referenced this review paper you've been reading. So you might find some more recent stuff, whatever, right? So you can kind of figure everything out from there, and you can just have this big collection of stuff that you can read through and start to get an idea of what's come before. And then once you have that, then you sit there and you use your reasoning skills and like, okay, well, what's missing? Is there something that hasn't been looked at? Or if there's something that has been looked at, but maybe there's just a better way to do it, or you just feel really skeptical about the methods for whatever reason, not that they were, stupid or malicious or whatever, but just like, maybe we just know better now, right? Or maybe there's better technology now. And there's a whole bunch of reasons to choose a research question. But I think that's generally a good way to kind of get up to speed somewhat. And then now you sort of have a groundwork or a framework of like, okay, this is sort of what I'm interested in looking at. Now we got to figure out how to do it, right? Which is difficult. Sometimes you can get a good idea just from reading those previous studies. You can sort of mirror what they did. You should, as we'll probably touch on later, like they should describe the methods in a lot of detail. So you should be able to do exactly the same thing if you so choose. But you know, you can get a good idea from previous work, or maybe you can see what previous work did that you believe was a mistake that you can try to improve on. If you have a rationale, you can describe why that would be better. Sure. And I think the other big thing to touch on, and then I'll kind of pass it back, is the constraints. Right, constraints are massive when it comes time to doing this, because it's and it changes so much based on what you're doing as well, right? Like if there's constraints in terms of the physical time and energy that is required to do the study, and the participants, and the, you know, who do you target in terms of getting to participate in the study. There's just a whole bunch of stuff on that side of the constraints. And then there's other things with like constraints of the research question itself. Like if you want to look at something, so for example, one thing I'm super interested in is more stuff with the pump, and like, does this actually help hypertrophy? That's cool. It sounds like an easy question, right? But like, that's so complex. What is the pump? How are we measuring it? Is that a valid measurement? Is it consistent? Like, how are we then measuring hypertrophy? How are we going to relate the two? How do I know it's causative? There's just so many rocks to turn over, and there's just infinite examples of things like that. So once you have the topic you're interested in, the sort of niche within that topic that you want to look at, now we got to think through what are the constraints of that logistically, but also in terms of the question itself, and really figuring out how am I measuring this, and like all of that. I hope that it makes sense just hearing that, like how much thought that actually takes. It's how long did it take you in the planning stages for your dissertation project? Just the planning stages.
I mean, before I even applied, Eric was like, okay, send me a list of topics you're interested in. I sent him like 20, 30 things. Just like general interest. Cool. Narrowed it down to 10. Give a little bit more detail into those 10. Cool. Narrow it down to 5. Even more detail, and cite some stuff of like how it's been done, or maybe some rationale in general. Then narrow it down to one thing. So that alone, before I even got it or started my PhD, took some time, a couple of months. And then the way it worked at AUT in New Zealand was, once you start, like your start date, you have typically anywhere between 6 to 12 months to then do your like proposal of, hey, this is what I want to do. So sometimes it usually just takes up to a year, including the stuff beforehand of like reading everything, trying to find what your question is, what the best way to answer it is. Can you even answer it the way you want to answer it? What are we working with, like you said, in terms of constraints? What's available at the school? Do we have devices to measure soreness, devices to measure hypertrophy, devices to measure whatever? And then do we have people who can accurately measure those? Are they good at it? Can we get those people to be there in the times we need to be them? Reliability, so many things to consider, right? So I think it's and again, we're not complaining, but people don't know that. People don't know we spend all this time. They just see the paper. Often they see the conclusion. They're like, cool, this is what I get. And they don't see the work behind. And you don't need to necessarily know that, but I think it's helpful. And I think by talking about it, or people acknowledging it, it can give us a better place to be in the space, not us specifically, but in general, everyone. Because if we're all trying to just better each other and better the environment that we're in the field, all that, it's just, that's what we want, right? We want to be attacking each other. So now that we have all these idea of what the question is, like we said, thinking about all the feasibility things, it's then just again trying to combat with the idea of you're not trying to be right. Right? You're not trying to get a specific answer for your question that will confirm your bias or that you want to, right? You're not like, okay, we're going to prove why length partials are not good. Or you cannot do that. That's going to affect your overall quality of the research. And a lot of the stuff we are talking about and are being very thorough about is because we are aiming for high quality types of research. Don't get me wrong, and not a shot on anyone that has been doing the research or that research papers out there. There's not a lot of high quality stuff. And that's very warranted and understandable, again, because of how much constraints we're working with, right? We don't know, if someone puts out a paper, we don't know what they were working. They don't always talk about like, hey, we did this during COVID, so we kind of did the best we could. Sometimes they don't say that, sometimes they do. But I think it's just being maybe compassionate is the word, understanding. Okay, so much more goes behind it. But yeah, it took a while for me. I don't know about for you, but it's you
Oh,
don't realize it. And even then, after I got my initial question, it changed a couple different times. One, yes, because of COVID, but two, just feasibility, right? I wanted to use this machine. Ended up, I really couldn't. It's just not possible. I would have to do so much stuff, move a lot of things, have this rework. Time frame didn't work out with other people that needed to use it because a lot of times you're sharing space in the lab with other people, or if there's specific pieces of equipment in other areas of the school, you're sharing that with other people. It's there's a lot, man. There's a lot.
there's a lot. Yeah, it took me forever as well, because it's uh, for me. It was interesting for me too because like my topic in general is auto-regulating volume, whether or not that's better for hypertrophy compared to just always doing the same basic terms, right? So, like we said, thinking about what other research has been done, and there's a tiny bit, not hardly anything in autoregulation period for hypertrophy. There's almost nothing, and then in terms of like set volume, right? Like it just doesn't. It's not really a thing. There's one study that Eric did. It was only 3 weeks long, and there was no hypertrophy measurements. They were just seeing proof of concept. Can you, which is step one in research, also, right? We got to have a. This is what the deload study was that Max Pullman did. Like things like this, where it's just does like almost on a black and white scale. Does this result in something different, or does this happen? And then you can get more granular over time, right? So like he had a study that was, I'm trying to remember the exact, I think it was an RPE, certain RPE value that they were doing back off sets until they hit a certain RPE number with the set load and rep target. And they were just seeing by doing that, does people's fatigue and readiness, et cetera, result in a different number of sets by having that sort of cutoff? And it did. Cool. But there's nothing to say, did that cause hypertrophy or not, or whatever.
Was that that was with the weightlifters, right? That was for his PhD, I'm pretty sure.
I think so. Yeah.
Dude, and this is, I have the insider here. So like I remember him talking about it. He would have to load up his car with all the plates and bars and go to Olympic weightlifting gyms
Ugh,
to get the people to do this.
yeah.
What? That like, when you think about that, it's kind of
Yeah.
crazy. It's a small car too, but dude, because we couldn't get, or he couldn't get rather, participants to come to the lab because that's hard, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. But like it wasn't feasible, so he was putting in the work to drive around all the stuff in his car. Like, all right, we're gonna do it on your time in your gym. Make
Yeah.
the barrier of entry as easy as possible because I really need participants. And even then, it's maybe he didn't get as much as he wanted to. You got a good amount. I think the study turned out well and all that. And
Yeah.
it was just like, dude, if you, maybe people don't know that, but seeing him do that, and again, us doing similar things or things around that area of making it happen in whichever way we can, and putting in that work, it's people don't realize that.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that initial. So like my topic was easy in terms of looking at the background research because there wasn't very much. If you think about, you want to do a study on BFR, good luck, my friend. You have a lot of reading to do, right? Like there's just topics that are way more researched than mine. So like that was nice, but okay, cool. Now I have my topic. Now we got to brainstorm how exactly are we going to do this. Oh, that won't work, right? Like that's just not a realistic way, or like, oh, that doesn't control for some of these other confounding variables, we call it, right? Like something that might impact the outcome that we want to make sure we're controlling for. Sometimes you forget to control for those things. Now, okay, now we got to go back and revise some of the methods and so on and so forth. And you think about, to be able to actually detect a difference in muscle size. Like we're talking about a very small difference that has measurement error, and so now we have to account for that. Like I don't want to do all this work and just have everything be super ambiguous. Like that's a bummer. So we got to make sure that we design things in such a way that we actually are able to pick up a difference. We have the equipment, it's the proper time, length, blah blah blah, and you still don't know for sure. It's just giving yourself the best possible chance. But you have all that stuff, and then not always, but sometimes you'll go out and do like pilot testing on the study design, which I did. Geez, so I spent a couple weeks having. I think I had. It was like 7 or 8 people, I think, including myself, pilot test the pre-testing session to see if it would result in something in what I was sort of thinking that it would. We just had to test it out. because it hadn't been done before, right? And then basically the thought was, if you do 8 sets to failure and we track how much you fatigue across those sets, meaning if everything's to failure, we're tracking volume load, right? Adjusting the weight to stay within a certain rep range. Even just that, we have to have a certain method of how we're adjusting the weight, right? Which for us, we're targeting 8 to 12 reps. For every rep outside of that range, we adjust the load by 4%, right? It has to be objective, which there might be a better or worse way to do some of these things. That's fair, but you got to pick something, right? So this is why we pilot test and figure out what seems to work. So anyway, we had to pilot test the load adjustment thing. And then I did the pre-testing thing. Like, does this actually lead to individual differences that people fatigue a different amount? And they did. Sweet. Okay. Premise is okay, intact. And then I had to pilot test the actual training intervention. I did it myself for like a month, I think, a month or two. And just to see, does this weird thing that I came up with actually result in differences in volume? Not that it's going to lead to more growth or not, but just does it actually function in a way that allows me to test the thing that I'm trying to test? And we had to tweak it a few times, and eventually we found something that seemed to work. And okay, now we can bring other people in, right? So like, this is before now we have to write up the IRB and get approval from the university. That takes a long time. It's this huge document. You got to fully referenced, and then you send it to them, and then they might ask for revisions, or they might, so like that takes a long time. Then we can finally go out and start recruiting. That might take a long time to get people on board. And then the study time frame, obviously, and so that it takes a long time to even get something rolling and even have your idea that could seem so simple on the surface, that now you actually have something tangible to test, right? Like, that already is a big timeline.
And pilot testing should not be undermined. A lot of the times we're trying to figure out, hey, will this kill the person? Is 8 sets to failure going to be too much for them?
Right.
Or like, should we go 5? Or if we're hitting 1RMs every single day, should it be at 100% 1RM or 90% 1RM? And a lot of times we get hurt, so we're not going to make other people do that. Or
Right.
damn, there's no way I can, I'm physically shaking. I did 5 sets to failure on an empty stomach just to see if the study works well. I'm pretty resilient. I don't think people are going to be able to do it. Maybe we should dial it to 4 sets, right? Like, we go through hell so that we can help answer the question as best as you can. Again, I'm not. Yeah. It's just fun to think about because I like that process. It's cool. It's very specific. It's the insider. People don't realize we do pilot testing, but man, there's so many stories come out of it too. Like hearing about the 1RM study that Soderus did. Seeing, I had piloted some stuff for Andrew King's carbohydrate pre-training study, and I was like, dude, this is brutal, I'm not gonna lie. And we were like, hey, we know we're asking so much from these participants, and we need to find that line. And this is what we talked about a little bit before, and are talking more about in depth now, is we got to find that line of, yes, this might be the most optimal way to answer this question, but is it feasible? Are we going to get people to actually stay consistent with this protocol, or are they going to do one day and be like, there's no way I'm doing that 4 times in a row, there's no possible way, and then we just don't get the participants, right? Yeah. There's all these things we need to consider, and pilot testing helps a lot, but hurts a lot.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good segue to talk about some of the participant stuff.
Yeah.
What are some other things that people, or not even just people in general, that we didn't know before we started trying to do this ourselves?
It matters what kind of participants you have. It matters what research has been done already in there. Because if you look at just research in general, we know people are going to respond differently if they're novices, if they're intermediate levels, if they're advanced levels. There's different responses. That's just the way it works. So if we're trying to answer a specific question, we need to keep that in mind, right? Like, is this for more advanced people or people who are just not brand new, right? Because then comes the idea of, okay, what is intermediate? What is novice? What is expert? And when you actually try looking it up, because I remember I had to do this for my survey, there's not too much. And if there is, that's also varies. So I don't think we have a good answer to say it blanketly for everyone. But when you're doing it, when you're conducting research, you need to have something to reference. So I remember I referenced something that was like 0 to 6 months was novice, 1 to 2 was like intermediate, 2 to this was advanced, and this was like expert, was like 5+, 7+, whatever it was, right? You had something to work off of. You cited an ASA paper. You're giving some rationale of why you're doing it, and that's what it all comes down to. You have some rationale. Usually it's another paper. A lot of times they're saying, hey, we did this just because.
Yeah.
you have to reference something to some degree, right? And that takes looking back. But yeah, so the participants matter, and I would just like to give a very specific shout out to participants in general, because man, we know we ask a lot, and I think people don't realize that we really do ask a lot. We're saying, hey, for the next 8 weeks, you're not doing your own training at all. Maybe you're gonna do like this quote unquote suboptimal training because you got put in that group that only does a little bit of volume. That's my bad. That's just how it works. But it's and we do ask a lot, and we often can't give too much because sometimes we don't have funding, we don't give money, or sometimes our funding is just for our PhD funds, and we're like, the best I could do is $50 because I need to get as many other people, and I'm sorry, but and this is where I would like to give a shout out and a pose to be better for people, like a push to be better for researchers, of like really appreciate your participants, right? Like it's show them you care, and you can do that without money, right? Just showing them like their time is very valuable, their efforts are very valuable. Just have good conversations with them, right? A lot of the times this is their first introduction into what research is, and I know we've been doing quote unquote complaining, or we're talking in depth about stuff, but dude, research is fun. And I think a lot of times people forget that, and it's extremely important to highlight that it's fun. It's fun for the researcher. It's fun for the participant. It's stressful for both people, parties, right? And I think but if we're all like just when it comes down to it, usually we're just there lifting weights because we love lifting weights and we want to answer some questions, and that's both people. And if we have that chance as researchers to open the door to participants saying, hey, this is how cool research can be, how fun it is, that they are excited to come back to the lab for the next session, for another study even down the line, right? Some people, I know at AOT, we had people who would religiously do our studies because they enjoyed it, and they're just phenomenal humans. Because like that, we appreciate that more. And funnily enough, a lot of them ended up like being really good friends with, right? I lived with a bunch of them just because we had shared values. It's cool people, and it ends up, you just don't realize opportunities that can arise both as a researcher and a participant if you're looking for it. So like if you're out there, you can't do research, be a participant. It helps more than you ever could imagine, and also can open many doors for yourself, right? And that doesn't have to even be selfish, because you're still contributing, and vice versa. Researchers don't have to feel selfish by asking for people, all that. We're all in it together. We're all in this together. No, we're not singing that. Okay, but yeah, man. I think people forget, and that's something I always really try to highlight: is research is fun. It should be, and it's important that comes from the researchers, and it's resonating. Create that environment in the lab that people want to be around, researchers included, participants especially.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I've had a similar experience. I mean, like we've had people. Who, there's one person in particular that has done every single study that has happened in our lab over the last 5 years that I've been here. Like every single one. Because he just he loves being involved in like he thinks it's just interesting in and of itself. He likes hanging out in the lab. Like we have a good time together, and like we work hard when we're in there, right? I mean, they're doing sets to failure, they're doing all kinds of stuff, but like that's also fun. A lot of us like lifting anyway. We like training hard. It's not a big ask for some people. It is. Maybe they're not used to training as hard as they think they are, or something like that. So we got to kind of push them a little bit more or whatever. But that's a huge thing of just like making sure that the participants have such a good experience. Like, dude, 3 of our current master students were participants last semester, and they liked it enough that they were like, hey, like let me do my master's. Like that's crazy. That's awesome. So like that is huge, and I very much agree. We ask a lot of them. They are very generous with their time and energy, and it's awesome. It's just a shame that they're not all pro bodybuilders, because then their data is just not usable. So sorry.
But it's hard to get participants. Again, not
Yeah.
complaining, but it is. Because again, because we're asking so much, because we're on probably a time limit for ourselves, because we're just we're trying to graduate, or it's for a PhD or a master's or whatever it is, or the semester's ending, or we're just hurrying. There's so many things to consider, and we're like, imagine you said this a lot of times too, where it's like you're just telling them to drop their training completely, do this, come to the lab every single day. I remember for my master's, it was like 5 days in a row because we were doing a time course. So they're coming 5 days in a row. They're only doing some lifting, like beat them up. And then after the 4 days, it's like top, like a single at 70%. And then we're taking blood. But imagine taking blood every day. That's scary for a lot of people. Surprisingly, a lot of people. Maybe not surprisingly, because it's needles, it's scary, and it's every day. But so many people pulled out because they're like, dude, I just can't. I remember I was piloting for that. Again, another fun pilot story. When you have people who aren't good at putting needles in the body to get blood, you're the pincushion. I was a pincushion. That was fun. Yeah. So it's yeah, again, it's hard to get participants. It's hard to get, especially because we're asking for so much specific criteria, because we need to answer a specific question so that we can translate it in our conclusions and how we're discussing things based on that specific population, right? So if we're asking people who are well trained, whichever way you want to frame it, okay, it's hard to get people who are well trained if a lot of the times, again, we're looking for college participants, because a lot of times research, that's just how it happens. We're at school. With that comes all the constraints, like we just said. Time. Okay, we need to get them in before the semester ends. So maybe we're working with 8, maybe 12 weeks if we're lucky.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then if they're in college, again, most of the time they're between 18 to 25. Sometimes you get some older, above 25 ones. But it's like, okay, unless you were training when you were 8 years old, you're going to have maybe 2-3 years of experience. And depending on what kind of experience that was it on a program? Was it just lifting some weights with the lacrosse team once a week in high school? All that comes into play, and it's just like we're working with a small pool, and we're asking for an even smaller pool with very specific regulations to get into this other pool.
Yeah, and it's like sometimes you want people who are completely untrained, right? If your research question, like you said, is specific to that, then sweet. I think the common critique we always get is like, oh, they only had 3 years of experience or whatever, right? But like also think about it like this, this is what made it click for me, because I was that person before. And I think what made it make sense to me finally was when I saw how this was being measured, and how, like, we're looking for very small effects, right? Like if you talk about a change in muscle thickness from over 10 weeks, right? It's really small. And we need to use an ultrasound or an MRI or something to be able to measure it. There's going to be variation and error within those measurement techniques. So now it's even harder to detect a difference. So we need a bigger difference so that we can actually see it, right? So if we have somebody who's been lifting for 12 years, they're growing so little. Even with the most precise measurement techniques, the best possible study design, all this, you just might not see a difference because you just didn't have enough time, right? So then all of a sudden, it's not that the study was bad, but it's kind of like, well, we can't do anything with this because it's completely ambiguous. Maybe one of the conditions was better, but we don't know because we just couldn't, there was no effect for us to be able to measure, right? So that is, to me, that made it click of like, okay, if it's like a quote unquote advanced technique, right? I hate saying that term, but we talked about that before, right? Hopefully that makes some sense. Yeah. If it's something that's not just kind of bare basic training, then I typically would like to see somebody with training experience, because novices are going to grow from anything, right? But like, you want that sweet spot. You don't want them super well trained, because I want to be able to actually see, was there a difference? So I think that sweet spot that happens to work pretty well with a lot of the training experience of, these college age students, that, like you said, usually somewhere in that kind of 18 to 25, maybe 18 to 30 sometimes, you can get grad students and stuff too, where it just, I don't know, like, it's convenient because they're there, right? But it tends to kind of hit that middle ground that we're sort of looking for anyway. And you can vet the subjects, you know what I mean? Like when people, I don't know exactly how AUT worked, but at FAU, at least, people come in, like when we're telling people about the study, we let them know what sort of inclusion criteria we have, right? There's certain criteria we're looking for. A certain number of years of training experience, your squat 1RM has to be your body weight times 1.5 or 2 or whatever, right? Like whatever you choose. And we tell them, and then they come into the lab and we talk to them more. And like now we have them fill out a pretty in-depth training questionnaire. And like we're getting even more information, like how much volume do they usually do? How close to failure do they go? What rep range do they usually, like all these kinds of things. And like, okay, that helps a lot. And then we can go do some like familiarization pre-testing stuff. And sometimes it's just like, I don't know if you were being entirely truthful here, bro. Like there's something, so like we can, through this process, this sounds bad, but like you kind of weed out people who just don't fit the inclusion criteria that you're looking for. So absolutely, while there's going to be people who are pretty novice, who kind of still get into some of these studies. I don't think that's a huge deal, to be clear, but it is going to happen every once in a while. But for the most part, people are, they're fitting, as long as the research team is being diligent. Like, you can tailor your sample to kind of be something that is good for the research question. And I had another point that is now eluding me, and so let me very smoothly pass this to you while I try to remember what I was going to say.
It's so heartbreaking when you have someone reach out and they go through all this stuff, and then you go to the familiarization phase, and you're like, dude, I'm so sorry, but like, we have this specific criteria for a reason, like we said, and you just don't fit it. So like, we just physically cannot. So here we are struggling to get people.
Yeah.
We probably go through, like, I don't know about you, but like 100 plus people will reach out, like, hey, I saw your flyer at the school, or I saw I'm in your class, or whatever, however means you're promoting stuff on Instagram. They reach out, you go through this time, you take their time, especially too. It takes your time too, but you sign up for that. They necessarily don't when you're going through this process of trying to figure it out, which is, you need to be aware of that. Yeah. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, sorry, no. Even though, man, I need people, and you're so excited, but I just cannot. I hated that so much. That hurt my feelings so bad. Yeah. So that's where, like I said, you got to be cautious of that. A lot of times, like, hey, dude, I will work with you if you're willing to, like, you want to work with me. I'll write you up a program. Here's like a 4 or 8 week thing. We'll work on it. We'll get to somewhere we need to be, and then maybe down the line, if either a different study comes up and you're ready for it, or you fit the criteria for that, we will take you 100%. Right? So I think, again, being aware of that as a researcher and being appreciative of their time and efforts. But dude, that hurt my feelings.
What sucks is when we have one that's your bench 1RM has to be a certain body weight times whatever, and when someone comes in with all their boys and they're all testing their 1RM, and there's like one of them that you got to be like really nicely like, sorry dude, you're not strong enough. Like, that sucks.
And then they have to drop out at that point of college, not even just to study, just college, because like that's just sad.
Lifting.
Their friends like, oh, sorry bro, we're science based now. You're not. Kidding, by the way. But yeah, it's again, people don't realize that. But if we really want to keep the quality of the research high, we really want to make sure we're answering this question. We have to do it. We have to go through all these things. We have to break people's hearts. I have to break my own heart, and it's just, you gotta do it, and it's tough. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff to consider, right? And I think it's. And the reason why we were spending so much time talking on the methods and why it's so important is because, I mean, Zordo says this all the time, and you briefly mentioned it earlier, where it's, you want to, again, answer your question, but when you're writing this up, you want to be as clear as possible how you did all these things, the type of participants, how you did each piece of the methodology, how you conducted this study, how you conducted this, so that other people who are reading it, usually other researchers for the most part, they can then, ideally, they can replicate that study the next day if they had wanted to, or down the line. Like, you should be so clear so that we can replicate studies, get more information, because as we know, one study isn't everything. We need to see if that's consistent across the board. So like, having this high quality or high standard and high quality is tough, and then replicating that over time, tough. But we said this quite a bit before as well, as this field is still very new when you think about it, right? Maybe, and especially over the 10 years, like, so much has changed. Like, we now really know how to conduct a good 1RM. At least, hey, I'm going to toot FAU's horn, because, dude, Zordos nailed it. He did so well with it, and it ingrained it in me. And when I went to AUT, I'm like, no, we're doing, I mean, Helms agreed with it too, but like, we're going to be doing it this way, because we've tried and true method. We've done it many times. You can get your 1RM under 3 attempts, like, without question, because we have that experience. We have it laid out. We have all that. We've done thousands of 1RM tests, right? Yeah. And it's like, okay, that's cool. And again, not every lab is doing that. Not every lab necessarily has to do that, but that can make a difference, right? And I think if we should be holding this high standard for everyone.
For sure. Yeah, dude. Yeah. Like, the other thing with, like, the test, I know we're kind of deviating from the participants thing a little bit, but another thought that comes up with that is we've started doing a lot of, like, multiple, like, if you're taking, let's say it's an ultrasound scan, right? For a pre-testing, whatever, muscle size. Multiple scan. You don't just take one scan, right? We take 3. So we can, average them together. And then post-testing, same thing. Because, like, if you just do one scan, you might be a little off, right? If you take multiple, it's more precise. But then also doing a lot of midpoint testing. We do that now. Like now, dude, for my dissertation study, I'm doing pre-test, post-test, and 4 midpoints, and there's 3 scans at every single one of those. So like just trying to get that precision as high as we can. And there's I'm forgetting the name of the study, but Paul Swinton did the analysis where he literally showed this, that midpoint testing drastically increases the precision of your measurements. Like it's just so much better. So like that we started doing that, you know. So like it's things like that it doesn't mean previous studies that don't do that are wrong or bad. It's just like the field progresses as we go. Like you were saying with the 1RM testing, like we figure out methods that just work a little bit better, and like, okay, we'll start doing that from now on. Which also makes me think maybe we want to do multiple 1RM tests in pre-testing so that we get an idea of what the normal fluctuation is. Something that we've started doing a lot in general, but like it's been really hammered home to me with the case study I'm doing for my prep was a ton of baseline testing to get like just the normal variability in every outcome that we're looking at. That way you can get the what's called the smallest detectable difference, or smallest detectable effect size, however you want to define it. But it's like, what is the smallest change that you can deem to be an actual difference? It's not just measurement error, and it's not just normal fluctuations in performance or whatever. That like statistically we can do that with a lot of pre-testing. Then by the end we can have even more confidence in the results. So I'm like, man, a lot of these strength studies, what if we did that, right? What if their pre-testing was just an abnormally good day or an abnormally bad day? That might throw it off. So there's a lot of methodology stuff with that. But I think the other thing I wanted to throw out with the like participant stuff, design stuff, whatever, is you mentioned the time frame. Like we got to squeeze it in a semester usually, which is why they're usually 8, 10, 12 weeks long, because people travel during spring break, during Christmas break, during summer, whatever.
You're
So
saying people have lives outside
yeah,
of being in a lab?
same.
What? Don't know what that is.
Yeah, but like the other kind of stuff is you might see a study and it's like, well, why did they do that exercise, or why did they? It's like, well, maybe that's all the equipment that they had, right? Like it comes back to the constraints thing. There's a lot that maybe all they had was a leg extension, or all they had was a barbell, so they had to squat, even though you might argue a different exercise would be better for their question or whatever. So there's or you mentioned other equipment like measuring soreness. Well, how are we measuring soreness? What's it called? Algometer?
Pressure algometer.
Yeah.
Like, do we have 2K? We can just drop and to
Yeah,
get that.
all this stuff costs money too, right?
Nope.
So it's tough, man. It's really tough, and I think that it's very fair to critique these things. Like that's 100% true. It's very fair to critique these things, and it's fair to have less confidence or more confidence in the results based on these things, as long as it's like rational, right? But at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's useless or that we shouldn't pay attention to it at all. It just is more nuance that we should be thinking about. Especially to me, the biggest thing is this isn't on the coaches and practitioners and stuff, right? Like it's on the scientists, making sure that they write everything clearly in the paper, like you mentioned, that this could be exactly replicated to someone who read it. But it's also on, maybe more so, on the communicators who are describing the study to the masses, to really take their time and be cautious and highlight the important details and pros and cons of the design, right? Not to say it was a bad study, but just like hey, this is what they found. It's really cool, really exciting. But there's this to think about, so maybe we should be kind of cautious, or just little things like that can go a long way.
It's the idea and the big difference between critiquing / attacking versus acknowledging limitations and constraints and deciphering like conclusions and applications within those, right? So like, hey, we know we could only do this, or we only did these type of squats, and we only looked at these specific population. So when you are interpreting this, or when you're reading this, keep that in mind, right? And you can only say so much to some degree too, because then there's all the word limits. Like, how much can you actually put in your paper itself as a communicator? But there's so much that goes on, and then, like you said, sometimes that gets lost in translation from people who are reading it or trying to communicate it via social media, and they don't have necessarily the skills. Again, not an attack on them, but just they don't understand that, or they don't have the skills, or maybe, or most likely, you just get more clicks when you say more inflammatory or sexy in quotation type things, or whatever it is nowadays. We lose a lot in this translation, and it's kind of sad and it hurts, but it's also people could be doing better who are trying to communicate science, us included too, as especially us as researchers who probably should be communicating more in general about it, right? But then it's hard because when we're competing in a space with other people and we're fighting against other people in other groups and perhaps like camps, if you would, of people, it makes it tough because like yes, we're put all the limitations. We're trying to discuss this in a way that makes it, and at the end of the day, it makes us seem like we're just saying maybe this will work, maybe this will work. And that does happen a lot because we can only really say that with a lot of the information that we have. Maybe we have a good place to start, but like we always talk about, that's what research is: place to start, try it out. Here's all the limitations. Practically, we really don't know. We can't say with confidence with pretty much anything, but especially with a lot of the science in the elliptic realm, which is, you wouldn't think so if you're just looking on social media. You say, "Oh, this is definitely a way to do this." You're missing out on gains if you're not doing this,
Right.
and all these things. So it's a weird space to be in, and that's why we're trying to provide clarity, or just even for the first time introduce like these are things we're considering, or here's how research is conducted. Because again, like you said, maybe people just don't know, and that's okay.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it. And I guess one other thing to toss out there, because it's top of mind for me recently, working on this meta-analysis that I feel like I've been talking about forever. It's coming out soon, I promise. On the per session volume impact on hypertrophy and strength. Okay, topic. It doesn't matter about the topic, but we think about the hierarchy of evidence, right? What's at the tippy top of that meta-analysis? It's supposed to be the best. We have the most confidence in. Dude, I have learned so much over this last however long doing one of these things that even and maybe especially meta-analysis, we need to be really careful with looking at how it was done, and the people who are doing them need to be really attentive to how they write about how they did it in the paper, right? Like our, look at the preprints that the proximity to failure one is published now, but the preprint for the weekly volume and frequency one, like these are long ass papers. These are super long because there's just so much to describe, and like there's so many decisions that go into doing one of these projects. Like you have to, even just when you do your systematic search, depending on what keywords you put in, you might get different results, right? Depending on what inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria you choose, which is completely arbitrary, by the way, you're going to include different studies, right? You have to decide all these, are you looking for a certain amount of training experience? Is there a certain age that you're going to include or not include? Like, are you going to include only normal training, or are you going to include isometrics and isokinetic stuff? Are you going to include eccentric accentuated training? Are you going to include BFR? Like, there's so many decisions you got to make that can impact the results a little bit. Like there's just so much stuff like that I think this works both ways, right? Like, we've been talking a lot about people being skeptical of research because of some of these critiques. I think people should be more skeptical of meta-analysis sometimes. Like, I'm guilty of this too. I see one, I'm just like, oh, sweet, like that's super helpful. But like, you got to give that same level of thought into how it was done. Not that we should sit here and like try to pick it apart and be whatever, but like just look at what they did and form your conclusions based on what they did. Everything is, meta-analysis is constrained to the data that was included, right? It's only going to analyze the studies that it includes within the thing. But the same way as any individual study is constrained to the participants' data, right? So all I'm trying to say is that like those are not infallible either. And there's that Eric Trexler's talked about this. It's been a little bit now, but he had a really good article that I can't remember where it was, but was basically like, hey, like there's not all these meta-analyses are as perfect as we think. Like there's a lot of ways to do these analyses, and if you're a subscriber to Mass, you've probably seen he's completely redone a bunch of these and found slightly different results. And so there's a lot of wiggle room, a lot of just judgment calls. There's a lot of different ways to do the statistics that you can make a valid argument. There's probably I'm not the far from like an expert in that, but like I would hazard to guess, based on conversations with people who I would consider experts, most people who would be experts would agree on like a very small number of these methods that they would consider to be the best way to do it. But like there's still a bunch of other things that like might have some sort of, it's not that it's horrible, it's just maybe not the best or whatever, right? But anyways, like there's just so much stuff that goes into that too. We need to apply the same skepticism. And as I'm completely undermining the hype around my own meta-analysis, but mine's perfect though, just to be clear. Like, don't question mine. It was all done perfectly. It's exactly what we should do in all cases. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw that in there because we talked about individual studies a lot, but things like that, systematic reviews, narrative reviews, meta-analyses, whatever, like same stuff should apply. Let's think critically and just frame our level of confidence based on what they actually did. Yeah.
So after listening to this whole episode, what I think you're saying is nothing matters, especially in the science
Kind
realm.
of.
Like,
Kind
and yeah, because I mean, next year, a new meta-analysis is going to come out anyway, just refuting completely what just happened. But
Totally.
that's okay. Like we said, the field is new, but also the field is ever growing, and people just forget that we'll never have all the answers. We'll always try to push that forward and get more answers and get more context and just explore things. Like I said, we're here to answer questions. Whether it's right, wrong, can't really say. That's not a great way to look at science too, right versus wrong. It's more of like, okay, what is the information we got from this? How does it apply to my context? And that changes drastically between everyone, timelines, 5 years from now, tomorrow, all these things, right? So I think it's, after someone listening to this, they could be even more confused in a way, right? But that's okay. And we're just trying to give you the insight. Yeah. And then when it comes down to it, like we just want to kind of set the idea of what research is, what goes into it, so that we can be better at just talking about it and creating a space where we can talk about it without feeling attacked or without having and/ors and just these wars going on. Honestly, just wars going on like social media. Like sometimes it creates new discussion about it. It highlights papers. We ask some really good questions. We get some good questions from it, but like it doesn't need to be malicious, right? And I think if we create a place that's just welcoming to all and forces continual learning, I think it's going to be better. But it starts with understanding what goes into all that and acknowledging that and talking about that with that kind of limitation and that idea of, okay, here's how we're navigating it, and then how science then applies into practice to two different things. It helps give us some insight, or at least gives us a place to start to decide where to take some action. But it's not always going to be right. There's plenty of people right now who are high-level athletes who do not do anything remotely what the science says. Are you going to tell the common ones? Like, you're going to tell LeBron James to really squat ass to grass because everyone saw that video when he was like quarter squat, and everyone's like, "Man, you're going to be so much better if you just squatted ass to grass." Do you actually think that? I don't know. If you try translating stuff to actual athletics and like sports outside of the bodybuilding and powerlifting realm, I don't even want to touch that because we see we pigeonhole ourselves in like a niche within another niche, like bodybuilding. If someone asked me to write a program for, hey, I want to get better at soccer, I could maybe do something, but I would not feel comfortable.
Yeah, it wouldn't be horrible.
Yeah,
but it's not going to be the best thing ever, probably.
No, and I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. Even though, like, yes, I have a PhD in exercise science, but my topic is very specifically like bodybuilding and powerlifting, and that's where I am. So I think, I can acknowledge that. It's a lot of people can't, and they maybe don't. And I'm not calling them out, but I think it's just we just need to be better at critical thinking. We need better at keeping that open mind, like we always talk about. I think, and that's where we're kind of coming from with this side of the episode.
Yeah. I think what's been helpful for me the last few years, it's really changed my as I've learned more about this and been deeper into this world and trying to be a bit better about how I view and understand and discuss research and all these things, is thinking probabilistically. Like, I think, like, you're not going to be like, oh, there's a 70% chance that this, like, you're not going to say that. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying, like, nothing should ever sway us completely one way or the other. Individual study, meta-analysis, whatever. It's just degrees. It's how confident are you, right? What's the probability? Is it better or worse that X is leads to better result than Y for most people on average. You know what I mean? Like, which is a really annoying way to frame things. A lot of people, they want the answer, understandably so, but I think it's just so much more realistic to try to think about things that way, because at the end of the day, you're still getting an answer, right? Like you might not know 100% this is the absolute best thing for me to do, but you can say, based on what information we have, this is giving me the best chance. This is the most likely best thing that I should do, right? Which is functionally the same thing. It gives you something to try, and then if it doesn't work, well, then just try the next most likely thing, right? So one thing that we have not discussed that I do want to throw at you is there's a lot of research on men. There's not a whole lot of research beyond that, right? There's some, but a lot of it is just on the fellas. There's pros and cons, like not even pros and cons. It's just different considerations, right? Like, um, in my experience, I really love having female participants because they are really nice and they show up on time and they adhere to the protocols, and they're just they just have been awesome. Now the guys that we have worked with have all been awesome. Like, we've never had any issues. I'm sort of tongue in cheek, but the it's nice that nowadays things are starting to be, we see a lot more mixed samples, right? It's not just all men or just all women or whatever. So things are heading in the right direction for sure. I think there are some understandable, like menstrual cycle is an additional variable that can be difficult to design studies around. That I get, we've talked about so many limitations and constraints. I get why people want to avoid an extra one, right? Unless that's their specific research question. But I think there's probably one even more important reason that you brought up earlier, and I just wanted to kind of let you, get up there on the pedestal and really shine some light and hit us with some wisdom, and just help people understand.
Yeah, I think this is probably the most overlooked thing when it comes to why we're looking mainly at male participants. And it's gonna be tough because I'm gonna be honest here, but women are scary. Talking to women is the most fearful thing I could think about, and that's why I just refuse to even try to do any research on them. It's I've never talked to a girl, so I don't think I'm going to start by saying, "Hey, do you want to lift some weights or something?" Like, I even think about that, I'm getting kind of nervous. So I think people just often forget that women are scary, and talking to them is even more scary. So
Yeah, because remember, like, we're weird science nerds, right? Like, we're not that confident.
if people aren't watching, you think I could talk to a woman? Just look at
Bro, these days you're probably like Lady Killer with that room.
look
Dude.
at a Polytoad hanging out here with me.
Yeah,
Look at all the Pokemon stuff. No way.
you have 5 e-girls hiding behind you in the closet, right? Like, that's
I
where we're
mean, if
at.
you consider body pillows, sure. But now we're getting too much into my personal life, and I'm scared even more. But yeah, I think you hit all the nails on the head. It's just there's more things to consider. There are ways we can, navigate that as best possible, like tracking the cycle or trying to link up when they're on birth control. If they are, there's things we can consider, but it is an additional consideration. And if we're already struggling to get participants and we have to think about something else, do we want to play that? It depends on where you're at, right? Because I think, like we talked about briefly and before, we end up making a lot of compromises as researchers because we just have to, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it'd be ideal that we're feeding the meals to participants. We know exactly what they're eating. They're coming in the lab. We see that, we track that exactly because we know how important nutrition is for muscle building or strength gain. Like, we understand that. Ideally, we have them sleeping. Like, if we could control everything for the perfect environment so that we can answer the question as best as possible, that would be cool. This is not practical. It's not feasible. There's no way. So we make some, compromise along the way. Is, hey, what can we do? We can't ask you to come in and feed you every meal. We can't provide that. So maybe we'll do like just track your meals for 3 days. Say replicate this as best as possible. Make sure you're considering this every week. You have like a weekly average. So many ways to go about it that we give our best guess. Because again, we're asking so much for the participants. And that just kind of another thing to consider. Yes, like as researchers, especially, we know it'd be great to have everything, but at least in a lot of my studies, I had to be like, I just can't, I can't do that because I'm already asking them to, as soon as they wake up, take your heart rate on this app that I had to give you and make sure it's accurate and make sure you get the check mark saying it's good, and then answer all these questions every day as soon as you wake up for the next five weeks. Cool. And then you come in here, make sure you've eaten a very similar meal in the past 2 hours. You're coming in within the plus or minus 1 hour of the same time that you came in before. There's so many things that we ask, right? And then that's kind of again plays into the male versus female participants too. We're just another thing to consider depending on if that answers the question, if we have the practicality, the feasibility, the monetary means, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to make it happen. We would. We wish we had more female participants a lot of times. Like you said, they're great. It helps, gives us specific answers because the population matters, right? We would love to have more research in females. And I think it's getting there. I think we're seeing more, which is cool. But more is more, and more is cool. Both sides. We just want more research in general, and I think that's where we're coming from. It's just participate in research. This is all have been employed to get participants. This is a whole recruitment episode. It's just, if you get anything from it, go to your local college and participate in a study. That's it.
Yep. All this stuff is also part of why I was very cautious with my dissertation of wanting to do something that I could do within participant design.
Yeah.
Because it helps smooth out so many of those things.
Yeah.
If you're comparing half of your body to the other half of your body, at least with hypertrophy stuff, strength, you have, cross education, they call it, right? Where even if you only train your right arm, your left arm's still going to get a little bit stronger. I don't do strength stuff with that, but with muscle growth, that doesn't seem to happen. Sweet. And that way, like, even if your nutrition is suboptimal, at least both sides are on even playing field. And then I'm not comparing me to Colby to whoever else who might be in a different situation, different state, different nutrition, different sleep, stress, etc. I'm just looking at within each person. It just smooths out so much of that. But like we talked about before, not every research question fits every kind of design, and like I just said, like, we can't do that with strength, right? If you want to do a deadlift study or squat, bench, you can't do a single arm, like, unilateral bench press. It doesn't work, So then we need multiple groups. Okay, well, then to account for all that variation, we need a lot of people, and we need really precise measurements. We need a long time period. Like, it's all, like you said very well, it's all about making those trade-offs and working with the constraints and doing our best and hoping that we don't get absolutely shredded on Instagram when we post about the results.
Yeah, that's not, we're gonna get shredded either way. On stage and on Instagram. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's really well said, right? We, as researchers, we think a lot, we do a lot, we try our best. So even then, are we good?
Damn.
It's and it's just, I think it's important to remember that once you have the insight of what goes into research, like we talked about in this episode, hopefully that comes across. Again, we're not asking for attention or for solace or anything. We're just like, just think about this when you're reading or when you're interpreting. Oh, keep that open mind, keep the critical mind. Like, that's what we want too. We're critical as well on ourselves, on our own research papers, on our own, applications.
You too.
Yeah. Oh God. But even like, there's papers I've been on or I've done in the past where it's like, cool, maybe we've learned so much since then. I'd probably say something differently or do it a lot differently.
Sure.
Hell, almost every single research I've done is like, okay, I wish I could have done like that. Just can't happen. Yeah. We're adding more to the field. Other people hopefully will replicate it, do it better. I want people to do my research, but better. That I just want to push forward, right? I think that's what it is. It's not a contest. We're not trying to get answers. We're just nerds who like to lift weights, who want to learn what's going to give us the best chance. Give us somewhere to start. Give us something. And let's just be in the gym and make it happen. So that's what this episode's about. And we hope you enjoyed it. It was fun to talk about. It's cool. Like, even talking about, how much we love participants. We really do. We appreciate you again. We're going to keep saying that. We're always going to do. Great opportunity if you're actually, not involved, or just keep that in mind next time you're around.
And jokes aside, if you're kind of on the fence, like, oh, would I be interested in grad school? Or like, it's a great way to figure out if you'd actually be interested.
You said so many people. That's the pipeline. It is. I'm a research participant. Cool. Now I'm doing my master's. Now I'm doing my PhD. That happens very frequently. So if you're unsure, do it. Just read, learn, reach out to us, reach out to other researchers. Like, we don't understand how excited we get when someone's like, "Hey, I saw your study. Like, that sounds pretty cool." Like, yes. You think my research is cool? Like,
it's so much work, and it's so not appreciated most of the time.
Which we signed up for that kind of, and that's okay. We're not complaining, but it's it feels good when people talk about it, and because we're excited about our research too. That's why we do it.
I mean, we're not doing research to get famous. We do the training art to get famous.
Yes, and it's working out fantastically, dude. My inbox is filled with ads from RuneScape and anime body pillows, but another episode. But yeah, as always, we appreciate you all being here and listening, and we'll catch you at the next one.
Yeah.